matters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
Hey, folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Phantoms and Monsters Radio. Thanks for joining me. And I want to welcome all the new members to the channel as well as first timers in the chat. If you're listening to me for the first time, please like, subscribe to the channel. So I'm going to put up a graphic here of what we're supposedly talking about. You know, the Wendigo has been misappropriated from its original context in Algonquin folklore. Now, the word Wendigo actually, or roughly means the evil spirit that devours mankind. Now, originally, it was depicted as a cannibal ice giant and cautionary tale relevant to the realities of Algonquin life. The Euro-American popular culture kind of mutilated into what may only be described as what people think it is, a zombie were-deer. Now, first, the Algonquin monster has relevance to their traditional way of life. Their culture was reliant on teamwork. So selfishness is a deadly sin to them, and the Wendigo is the ultimate embodiment of that. It has none of that relevance to the modern Euro-Americans and to whom it is a generic man-eating monster. Secondly, Wendigo's psychosis is a real mental illness and was historically used as a justification to destroy the Algonquin culture. There are written accounts in the last 2 centuries of people suffering from this illness being murdered by their peers. Using the Wendigo as a generic man-eating monster completely bastardized the traditional legend. So then, how was the Wendigo tale altered? Now, this goes back over a century to Algernon Blackwood's story, The Wendigo. The story does not actually depict a Wendigo, but seems to get it confused with the Inuit, not Algonquin creature, the Ajirak, and possibly the Taraxoc. In the story, the monster burns away the victim's feet with friction, while in the myth, the Ajirak is sometimes described as stripping the flesh off its victim's shins, and if it survives, then it becomes a faster runner. The Ajirak is otherwise described as a trickster who kidnaps children or lures hunters by pretending to be a caribou. So it is easy to assume that Blackwood read about the Ajirak and then twisted the details for his own story. Now, the Euro-American popular culture takes the name of an Algonquin cannibal ice giant and applies it to a zombie were-deer. It has been utterly stripped of its original context and symbolism. And I doubt there will ever be much pushback against the zombie were-deer version since it has been burned into the popular culture at this point. Now, that being stated, I'm going to present several modern-day accounts that some of the witnesses described as Wendigo. Then you can determine what the creature is in the report. And is it an original folklore of the cannibal ice giant or something a bit more contemporary? So before I go any further, I want to mention that this channel is made possible by you clicking on the subscribe and like buttons and by you sharing our programming. Super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated, and you can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. The Buy Me a Coffee link is also shown below. So thanks for your consideration. Now, if you're in the chat and you have a question, please use all caps, and I'll try to get to each one of the presentations after the presentation. So we're going to talk about this first encounter, and I honestly don't know what to make of this, but the witness did send several sketches. Now, I know some of you are going to think, well, that's a crawler humanoid, or what some people refer to as a rake or a flesh gate or something to that effect. But if you listen carefully to the presentations tonight, you can tell there's something different. Now, I don't say that these are Wendigo. In fact, I think most of them, if not all of them, are not. But you can kind of distinguish what is actually in the Algonquin legend as opposed to what the modern day version or what people believe it to be in modern day. So this bizarre encounter occurred in the Red River Gorge of Kentucky. Now, of course, when you think of Wendigo, you think of the North. You think of Canada, you think of northern United States, not Kentucky. But anyway, this is what was written to me. I have no idea what we saw exactly that night. I have searched everywhere for sightings or even myths around the area we saw it and have found nothing. My husband and I think it could be a Wendigo, but I don't know. I haven't heard anyone else say that they've seen anything like that in the Red River Gorge, Kentucky. I guess I want help figuring out what we saw and what to do. Now, after the night I'm about to describe, but I think we've had some close encounters with it since. Now, my friends and I go camping a lot, and my favorite place is Red River Gorge, Kentucky. We go there often, and I've been going there ever since I was an infant. I'm 28 and now married with a kid and still go. It is the closest place to where I live where I can see the Milky Way pretty much every night. It's perfect for stargazing, and I've seen a shooting star every clear night I've been there. When you go without your kid, we can night hike to a good point out, good lookout point and stargaze for hours. Now, our first experience is night hiking. We would go to the trails we knew well and were used frequently during the day. Ones with long fences and gazebo resting places. Now, the most used trail is the trail by the Natural Bridge State Park that leads up to the Natural Bridge. This trail is around 2 miles uphill, depending on your starting point. I've done this trail every summer of my life and could do it blindfolded. It has wooden steps, carved rock steps, log handrails, multiple sitting points under a roof, cracked trash cans, but after reaching the main trailhead, it has no lights at all. I've used it often, and while it is uphill, the difficulty is low. If you have a good grip on your shoes and water, you'll be fine. My friends have done it with me multiple times and are confident in it as well. Hiking this trail at night is not allowed, but it's the woods, and I've never really been one to care about closing times, for literally outside. Now, when we use this main trail to hike to the top, we would park in the lot designated for the pool and the hoedown island. You walk across the road that leads to the pool, and you're in the first trail marker. You go up the gravel for a while and past the Natural Bridge State Park Lodge. There's a waterfall and some lights, so it's best to go fast and watch out for rangers that would tell you to leave. Now, when you walk around across another road and there's a mini shelter to sit in or a small rock wall to rest your legs, then it's the beginning of the trail to the top. Now, the night was weird to begin with. As soon as we started the hike, the clouds took over and it appeared that we'd be walking for nothing to even stargaze at. But we went anyway, just in case it cleared out by the time we got up there. In the beginning, it was just normal paranoia that was keeping us stressed and quiet, it seemed. You know you reach the bottom of the bridge when you see a giant wall of limestone. During this time, there was a gazebo that's set to the right of the wall, and the trail continues and followed next to the wall. Where you come from is a steep part of the trail, and the gazebo is welcome. My husband, my best friend at the time, and all sat on the gazebo steps, facing where we were looking down the trail that follows the limestone wall. We each had a bright LED headlamp and a handheld flashlight. We don't usually look at each other when we go on a night hike because the lights are so bright. We sit in a line like the Lord's Supper and walk in a line or staggered so we don't blind ourselves. It is after hours at this point. No ski lift rides had gone on for hours, and the rangers had already done their sweep and left right after we got out of the car and headed up. We left no time between them making sure the trail and the top are clear and us starting our hike up. The ski lift takes you up to the top, but there are workers that stay and do counts and only leave after it's clear. Now, I guess I must make these points because it's what I was thinking when what seemed out of nowhere, a girl with a headlamp begins to walk down the trail we are looking out at. She's in a sundress and flip-flops. This hike is uphill, and while it is easy hike, it's not easy with no water or real shoes. She'd have to have hiked up and down to this point with no food or water. Her light was bright, and when she reached where the trail turns from in front of the gazebo to down to where we come from, she stopped. She just stood there straight on like how a human is presented in an anatomical drawing. She was looking directly at us, all sitting there, and her light made me bring my hand up to shield my eyes. Now, she didn't turn away from our lights at all, or even seem bothered. She had 6 LED lights aimed directly at her face. I said, hello. She said, kind of what a pause between every word, something like, hello, how are you? I said something like, good, how are you? And she took even longer pauses and said, oh, I'm fine. She then just stood there, still with her hands to her side and facing and staring at us. Her light made it impossible to see her face, and it was so bright I had my hand up the entire time until she just turned and walked slowly down the trail part we had just come from. Now, she got to a part where the trail turned, and we saw her light just stay in the one spot for a minute until she turned, and the light faded out of sight. Now, we waited for a while before continuing up. I kept making comments about how weird that was, and everybody else just made it out to me being afraid. But no one ever came after her. Had she done this hike alone at night and somehow without being found by any ranger? We got up after a bit and started back up to the top. We felt like it took much longer than it ever had in the past, but we did make it to the top. There were stone steps named get you to the top of the bridge, and you can walk across it and whatever. But going up and being on the top, we could hear twigs snapping, almost alternating from the left then to the right. We lay down and tried to stargaze, but the clouds were even thicker now. It was miserably hot as well. We could hear voices at times, and my husband kept checking for people we heard. We never saw anyone. We saw a light flash, never saw anyone attached to it. And then we heard a bird call. But it wasn't like a real bird noise at all. It sounded like a person making bird calls, like rhythmic and not natural. I was convinced we weren't alone and hadn't been alone but also I am most easily spooked. I asked to leave as soon as they were ready to, and they were ready right then and there. And that scared me, that they were just as afraid as I was at that point. We began going down the way we came, and it felt like it was taking so long. We were going steady and quick, and it was downhill, but we were not making any ground, it seemed. It's hard to explain, but it was so weird that at one point I even said it out loud. I said, "This feels much longer." And they agreed with me. I kept looking behind me with the flashlight, and my husband kept looking out to the sides, and my friend kept hers mostly forward. I kept feeling watched and couldn't figure out what footsteps were ours, or if they were all ours that I heard. I would turn in the direction of any noise but not see anything. Now, when my husband was walking, he kept saying he was catching eyes in his flashlight. Usually you can catch raccoon eyes spying on you or some animal like that. He was afraid maybe a bear or a big dog or something. And he never got his lights on whatever eyes that were long enough to see an animal's size or shape. Now we're hiking down semi-flat lake area compared to the downhill hike we had been doing at least. The long fence or handrail or whatever it's called is on our right. We are in a row walking within reaching distance of this barrier. And my husband just stops walking altogether and says, "What's that?" But the question is more of like an alert. And I move my headlamp in that direction and don't see anything at first. Then both of his lights catch his shape. And then my headlamp catches it, and I move my hand lamp to the center and catch it while my friend simultaneously finds it in her lights as well. All six lights shined onto and kind of reflected off this light gray creature. It is bent in a crouching position, kneeling on its right leg, and starts turning towards us. It starts to slowly stand, and mine is racing still. It looks human, but it's too big. People mistake human shapes for what are bears in the woods often, but this was skinny. It is thin, big, and almost white. It's so light gray, and its skin resembles dolphin skin. There's a shine to it, and our lights get reflected a little when they're on it. It gradually comes to a full standing position in front of us. Its head is long, and its eyes are in a human position on the face in the front and not on the side like animals, but I could not see any other facial features. Just big, almost empty holes or pits that were its eyes. It looked directly at us and our lights. The way it stood was intimidating, almost like when a snake raises up and flexes their neck, all crazy to show prey that they're stronger and smarter. It was like it was stepping up to a fight, from crouching, then turning, then standing front on in front of us. The arms hung down low and the hands seemed too long. Its hands had to be by its knees. I guess it stood 9 foot or so and not that far in front of us. No hair at all, and its head was large as well. I couldn't process what I saw and was frozen. Then I just feel my husband hitting me on the back and yelling, "Run, run, run." I start to understand we have to get away from this thing, and it pivots and runs to the right, going backwards on the trail so it could get around the barrier onto the trail behind us. We take off running the rest of the way down the trail, knowing that this thing just took off much faster than us, and after it had crossed from behind the barrier, it would be gaining on us quickly. We didn't talk at all because when we tried, it felt almost as if we'd get caught. We keep running as fast as we can, but some areas were too steep. It never felt like we were out of sight of this creature. As we made it to the trail, beginning with the gravel, we could hear something to the side crashing down through the forest. We ran until we got to the car, and then we drove as fast as we could, and as soon as we got to the main road, Everything cleared up, and guess what? The stars were out. Now, when that thing looked at us, I knew it was smarter and faster than us. I knew that we hadn't seen it, that it would have easily taken one of us and gotten away. I think the only reason it hesitated was because so many of us saw it at once and we stayed together. Well, when we made it back to where we were staying, all of us took our phones and wrote a note about what we seen that night. We hadn't spoken about it until after we looked at each other's phones, and the stories were the same. Without a doubt, we had all seen something real. Now, there are some other sketches that they sent to me. Now, I know most people would say, well, that looks like a crawler humanoid. But I don't know if we've had too many, if any, of these crawler humanoids kind of trying to cut people off and being aggressive, let alone being 9 foot tall. It looks more like an alien being of some type, maybe a tall gray or something, but I don't know what it was. But quite frankly, that's a pretty harrowing story. I doubt very much if it's a Wendigo or anything like that. First of all, it's too far south, and second of all, it just doesn't match the traditional description of a Wendigo. Well, anyway, we'll get to the next account. A First Nations man recalls his experience with a manifestation while camping in the northern Canadian wilderness. He was told that it was Wendigo, or maybe it was a malevolent spirit. The witness states, I wasn't sure if I should share this story with anyone outside of my small circle of people that were there. But I want to share my experience in hopes that it saves someone's life or gives an understanding of what someone else has experienced. It was the late fall of 2010 in northern Canada. I went deep into the wilderness with my father and my eldest brother to hunt for moose. We left in the early morning just before sunrise, trying to cover as much distance as possible before nightfall. We traveled winding rivers and had to repeatedly portage our over rapids all day, and decided to set up camp just over the halfway to our destination. My father figured that we'd make the rest of the journey tomorrow. Well, when everyone bedded down for the night, I decided to go grab some firewood and relieve myself down by the bank by the river, just out of the reach of the light from the campfire. Now, out from the tree line, about 15 yards away, I could hear rustling in the bushes. I watched the area where I heard the noise and focused on that spot. I felt kind of funny, dizzy or lightheaded, and could smell this putrid odor, like old milk or rotten food. Then I saw the tree start to morph and move ever so slightly, and began to take the shape of a head and slight facial features. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness, and along with the tree line, I could hear the voice coming from there. I recognized it. The voice sounded like one of my relatives who had recently passed. The face took the shape of my relative. Hello, they said. I've missed you. Come see me. I smiled and stepped forward a bit, but stopped to analyze the situation. My relative's face stopped smiling and became motionless. The skin began to turn pale and peel away. Chunks of flesh from their cheek began to fall down and fall away, and I felt shock and fear overwhelm my body. I couldn't make sense of it at all, so I started to back away and make my way back to camp. I didn't realize at the time that I had been walking towards the voice, and I was further away from the camp light or the firelight. The voice became angry and began shouting me to come here. So I turned to run away, but as I looked back one more time, I saw the most disgusting thing that I'd ever seen. It was rotting flesh on gnawed bone, caved-in eyes, and a hollow chest cavity. This humanoid creature was tall and super thin. I ran as fast as I could, trying to yell for help, but the fear made my voice quiet and raspy. I ran along the riverbank, and I could hear the heavy breathing and the stomping feet from this thing right behind me. I made it onto the riverbank, but it grabbed a hold of my leg as I jumped up. I gripped and tore the grass, trying to lift myself and yell as loud as I could. Then finally, my voice came back, and I yelled, "Someone has my leg." My brother woke up and ran over to where I was then, and he pulled me up and took me over to the fire. I was terrified, trying to explain what I saw and that it looked like my relative, but it was not. I was trying to convince them that I wasn't seeing things, but my brother nodded his head and said, "I saw it too. I know." Well, that solidified it. He acknowledged that it was real. We stayed up all night after that, rifles loaded and close by. We packed up when the sun came up and went back home. We haven't shared the story with anyone out of fear of being labeled as crazy or even liars. I've had nightmares and couldn't sleep for months afterwards. I would see things, dark figures looking into my window, or hear whispers when I was walking home at night. Eventually, I saw this dark figure daily. I went to medicine men and shamans for help, but I've learned that the ceremonies only relieve it temporarily. Friends had given me everything from protection pouches to certain crystals. I found out that there's a strong possibility that I encountered a Wendigo. I learned that if you encounter one and survive, it attaches itself to you like a parasite. I learned that it could only do this if it touched you, which it did. Ever since that night, I've been on edge when I enter any forest or wooded area, which sucks because I love being in the outdoors, hunting, and in nature. Now, I always feel like I need to keep my back against something when I'm out in the wild. Anyways, draw your own conclusions about this. I paid a price for being an ignorant child to the stories of old. They're real. I can attest to that. Let's see. Now, this next one had title possibly a night deer, a not deer, but it didn't appear in photographs or leave tracks. So that's a little strange. Anyway, a family property along Lake Ontario seemed to hold some strange activity, according to the witness, particularly involving possible not deer sightings. What were these creatures? This is what I received. First off, I'd like to say I'm not sure what these things are. All of this is 100% true. My dad and brother have lake houses right next to each other in upstate New York on Lake Ontario. They are in a very secluded area on the peninsula. You can only get there by boat or by walking down a mile-long path deep through the forest. One winter morning, we were all getting ready to go out and play after a night of heavy snowfall. My uncle looked out the window toward the path we used to get back and forth from the parking lot to our houses. As he looked out, he saw a pair of the eeriest, strangest looking deer he or I had ever seen. They had all gray fur, long, dark, almond-shaped eyes that stared intently, and their antlers were two long, jagged horns protruding straight out of their skull. These deer were like none we had ever seen. My grandmother walked outside to take pictures of them. After she snapped a few pictures, they seemed to just walk away. The two deer silently strolled into the woods, not making a single sound. They did not even have to hop the slightest bit through the foot of snow on the ground. What makes this even weirder and startling has to do with the picture. After looking back, neither of the deer showed up in any of the photographs. The camera was fine, as everything but where the deer were standing was clearly photographed. Even what was behind the deer showed up in the photos. And when we walked over to where they had been walking, no more snow had fallen. This was a minute or two after they walked away. No tracks were found. The snow appeared untouched. Now, I know this story isn't exactly scary, but it's intriguing and a strange mystery. A few years later, my cousins and I were walking down the path. We all have a strange feeling I can only describe as dread. It was like the feeling you get when you're sitting outside the principal's office waiting to be called in. We looked over and saw two deer just like the ones before. The forest floor around the path was covered in leaves and dry brush, but we did not hear them walking around. The two deer were pacing, watching us. At least that's how I felt at the time and still feel to this day. The deer turned their heads simultaneously the second we looked at them. We exchanged excruciating eye contact for around 10 seconds or so. It could have been longer for all I know. It just felt so odd. Then they proceeded to walk over a hill out of sight. We did not hear them walk away. It's like they just floated above the ground. This was the early 2000s, and they have not been seen since then. This is still a topic of conversation with our family to this day. Also, there are many other creeper things that I've seen up by our lake house if anyone's interested, and we still talk about it. Anyway, I did tell them if they had any more stories to send it to me. Now, I've heard a lot of not deer accounts, but honestly, nothing with, as far as these animals not showing up on photos or not heard walking. Could there be something related to forest spirits or even Wendigo? I don't know. Now, an Androscoggin County, Maine resident recounts his terrifying experience with a possible Wendigo while walking late at night. The creature stalked him, whispered at him, and eventually showed itself. Now, he states, throughout my youth and through adulthood, I've had several encounters with entities and energies that are not of this realm, at least not as far as science and history is concerned. These past few years, I've had several terrifying experiences while being stalked while taking walks late at night around Turner, Maine. Sometimes I'm overcome with a sense of fear that's animalistic, and an innate sense of paranoia consumes me, as if something is watching from the woods and that I need to get to safety fast. On other occasions, I had something quite aggressively follow alongside me from the tree line, chasing me away from certain areas, whispering in a low human-like tone. It sounds like human footsteps crunching across tree branches and leaves, but so much larger, heavier than any human could step. This thing also can hurl itself from treetop to treetop. Its power is so great that it has knocked down trees, full-size trees, as it leaps. I could not make this up. It is terrifying to be followed by something that's whispering as it walks in the trees behind you or beside you, even when you're running. That can seemingly teleport from one side of the road to the other in seconds. And it is so big that it can knock down trees as it jumps from top to top. It is so evasive. It can do all these things while remaining hidden and not perceived by the naked eye. Besides those encounters, I've visually seen something I can only relate to as a Wendigo. It was either comfortable enough with my energy to reveal itself or something else altogether. Maybe it wanted to eat me. Maybe it wanted to possess me. Maybe it wanted to speak to me. I really don't know because I didn't stick around long enough to find out. The energy of this thing, the way it looked, was so offensive, so terrifying. I only remained long enough to visualize what I instinctively knew was coming through the woods, and it was about to show itself to me. I was frozen while I waited for this thing to come out of the woods. Looking back, I don't know if it was curiosity or the power of the creature itself. I locked my eyes with this thing, and when I did, I was suddenly watching myself from its perspective, as if I was now inside the creature. Horrified, I tore myself away. Luckily, I was on the front steps right next to the door and ran inside with a lit cigarette. I was so scared I wasn't even thinking of any thought besides run now. I locked the door, hurried to my bedroom, and screamed for my housemate. I refused to even step out of my bedroom for the entire night and pulled down the blinds. This encounter was so terrifying I was shaking for hours and didn't sleep that night. Some definite details I can remember this creature were that its face was sunken in, and its head was very large in size. Where its eyes should have been were craters of black, and in the middle, golden glowing orbs that were very bright and flame like. It was on all fours, but this thing can easily 100% walk away if it wanted to. The creature was very, very thin. I remember that detail clearly. His chest was near skeletal, and his stomach caved in as if it hadn't eaten in 100 years. Its arms and legs were very long. Both arms and legs were insanely muscled and massive. Honestly, its arms and legs were the only part of the creature's anatomy that had any mass about it. The creature itself was huge. I'm talking like 10 foot tall, easy. And if I had to guess, it weighed anywhere between 500 and 600 pounds. It seemingly had fur covering some parts of the body, along the tops of its arm, back, thighs, but fur was scarce. Initially, I thought werewolf, but after looking up different cryptids, I can safely say I don't think that's what it was. Another detail I remember was its mouth. This thing was smiling at me. Its teeth were razor sharp, almost needle-like and long. The size of its smile and the teeth took up most of its face. Where a nose should have been, there were just nostrils, almost like a skull. Its face was very skull-like. The whole body was very skeletal. The Androscoggin River area and all around Androscoggin County is very terrifying, old, haunted, and linked to some type of portal, I believe. Ley lines, perhaps. All this is just what I personally have witnessed and heard. So many times at night while walking along the river, I heard screams so terrifying, so otherworldly, I can only relate it to the cry of a banshee. In the woods around Lake Auburn and around Mount Appetite, heading toward Mechanic Falls, and then in the other direction towards Sabattis and Turner. This area has insanely negative, abrasive, offending energy. If you're going to walk at night, try to be aware. And yes, I know how all this sounds. Rest assured, I'm not delusional or in any sense crazy. I'm just looking forward to hearing other stories of a similar manner. Now, that area around Androscoggin River is well known for UFO and cryptid activity. There have been a couple very highly publicized UFO sightings around there. I don't know what this witness encountered, to be honest. Wendigo, crawler, or something completely different. I have no idea. A horrifying account of an encounter with an unknown cryptid, possibly a Wendigo, at a Girl Scout camp in central Montana. Result was the death of a counselor and the terrible maiming of one of the girls. This occurred in 2008. I was 10 years old and a Girl Scout in central Montana. They did a cool thing every summer for 2 weeks at a time. I was super excited because mostly the only thing that we had done was stay after school to talk and do arts and crafts. 2 weeks every summer, a bus system would go around to a bunch of the small towns in the area and round up Girl Scouts at 7 in the morning and drop them back home at 7 at night. It took 2 hours to drive to the campground this was situated on. It was an obscure campground with a single road in and out. There was forest for miles and miles in every direction, except for the south, which was where the road led. If you drove for an hour south, you'd see farms in the small town I lived in. The campground itself was a huge field with a lodge in the middle. The lodge was 2 stories and old, just barely big enough to fit a small gift shop run by a nice old Native American lady, a mess hall, and a huge kitchen. A staircase led to a balcony that went all around and faced down into the mess hall. There were a bunch of beds there for us to stay the night. Now, around the huge field were trails scattered to what we called stations. Every mile or so, a small campground would come into view. Each small troop of Girl Scouts, sorted by age, level, town, and then school, would have a station to itself as a waypoint to relax and gather at their nature hikes. Every 2 miles or so was a porta potty. I remember my station was one of the nicer ones, and we had a small troop. The situation itself was within 20 feet of a porta potty, which we decorated with stay out signs so no one else would use it. It was our porta potty for sure. It also had sturdy wooden rain cover over the picnic table and a fire pit, which we only used at once, and a small dirt clearing that was played in. The girls in my group were Emily, my next door neighbor. We were best friends at the time, Samantha, Alice, Lizzie, and then Princess. Our group leader was Miss Melinda, a chill senior. Most of the day, we would hike around looking for trails and plants and sometimes even making flower necklaces from wildflowers in the fields. Gimping was important to us, and I feel it is relatively important to the story as well. Gimping was more known to us as weaving, not the computer program. We would go to the lodge every day, and depending on how many points we earned from our hikes and activities, we could buy a color or two as a group and weave these little strips for our backpacks. Each day, a single troop did the same pattern and colors, which helped keep track of everyone. And if someone lost a gimp, it would be easily returned. The more gimp you had on your backpack, the more authority you had. Now, there used to be a guy who would walk around and check on the groups occasionally. He was super nice, and he always wore dark black hiking shoes, white socks, shorts, and his green army backpack. Everyone looked up to him and respected him. I think he was a park ranger or something, but I don't remember seeing a badge. He was nice, and everyone trusted him. If he wasn't a park ranger, he could have been a frequent camper or scout's grandpa or dad. That's pretty much the important details out of the way. So, one day at the end of the first week, I'm begging my mom to let me stay. She was working a part-time job and taking care of me and my 2-year-old brother. My dad was on his second mission in Iraq, which made her even more stressed. Finally, once my mom heard that Emily's mom was giving in, she allowed me to go under the condition that I make sure to brush my teeth and put up a lot of bug spray. I very happily agreed and rushed to my room to pack everything as soon as possible. So the next morning, with envelopes in hand, I and Emily got on the bus. When we arrived, we were jumping around Miss Melinda's like monkeys. She seemed happy for us and showed the envelopes to the old lady in the gift shop. The old lady smiled at us and got us to choose our own gimp colors to work on that afternoon while we waited in our bunks. She led us upstairs to where some older girls were cleaning up their bunks, and we got to choose ours. We were excited. That night, after all the kids who weren't staying left, we all went out with the 4 other group leaders and the gimp guy. We were each sorted into groups of 3. It was I, Emily, and the cadet named Jesse. And we're told that we could go to play some version of hide and seek. We were each given maps of the area, flashlights, and glow sticks. I think if we were tagged, we had to go back to the field and wait until the horn was sounded. The last team standing won. Afterward, we were going to have a huge fire and roast s'mores. That sounded good to us, and we all split up. We led Jesse to our station, but after we realized it was much too crowded, we slipped out and started going further. We planned on hiding in Jesse's station. It was further out and would be much harder to find, so we were fine with that. The gimp guy and the other leaders were supposed to be out monitoring the edge of the campground. Now, halfway into the game, it started getting dark. This is when we arrived at Jesse's camp. Me and Emily were kind of getting scared at that point, so we stayed closer to her and sat at the picnic table while she showed us how to gimp a swirly design. We were set on sitting everyone else out. Now, by the time it was dark enough that we had to turn our flashlights on, I could see Jessie was getting a bit nervous. She was a bit pale, which made me and Emily super quiet suddenly. We had been out there for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Is the group coming? Emily asked. Jessie shushed us both, looking out into the woods with her flashlight. We all sat stiff for a good 10 minutes. Me and Emily stopped gimping and looked around too, ready to spring up and bolt if a group came out of the brush. That was when we heard a growling sound. It was low, and if we had been talking, we wouldn't have heard it. I felt my little heart start beating fast. Is it a cougar? I asked softly, looking at Jesse. She whispered, if it is, I need you guys to start screaming and hold out your arms, okay? We both nodded, now thoroughly scared. We all jumped and squeaked when we saw movement. I remember dropping my gimp. I quickly leaned down to pick it up. That's when I heard Jesse gasp. I quickly looked up and froze. It was huge. It looked like a bear, but it stood on its back legs like a weird-looking deer. Its face looked vaguely human and looked like its mouth had been ripped open. Its face was covered in blood. It had a longish neck and thick shoulders and looked deathly skinny. I could barely make out tiny horns poking out from the scraggly brown hair. Its hair was falling out in clumps. Its arms were much too long, its knees bent. It looked kind of like it had paws, but I couldn't see that well because Jesse kept a flashlight pointed in its face. Two things scared me about it the most, though, as it wasn't already terrifying enough. Its eyes were milky white color, and its bloody claws was the Gimp man's bag. He never took that bag off, ever. We stared at each other for what felt like ages, and I realized that it wasn't growling, it was breathing. It sounded like it had a frog in its throat, but it physically couldn't cough. When it stepped forward, Jesse screamed and pushed us under the picnic table. We both started screaming too as she practically covered us with her body, throwing the flashlight out first, attempting to hit it as it started trying to claw away at the concrete table. Then she threw the glow sticks and whatever we could scrounge in our hiking bags. Books, first aid kits, gimp balls, rocks, bags of food, anything. It's hard for me to think about this all because it was just terrifying. Most kids fear something under their bed, but has something like this throw itself at you from far reaches of the forest you had once thought was safe in the middle of nowhere is a whole different nightmare. It was making a broken, cracked wailing or howling sound every few minutes before grunting and growling and heavily breathing as it tried to squeeze its claws and head under the table, or through the holes of the seats, or even through the holes of the concrete that had chipped out of the table. We were all still screaming too, and that was when it stopped. We all went deathly quiet, and I peeked out past Jesse's arm and saw it raise its head before looking around and marching around the table. It looked at the table every once in a while, and by now we were all just crying and covering our own mouths to stay quiet. It paused and looked back. I could still see its eyes. Just thinking about it makes me pause and shudder. Suddenly, it bounded towards the table and over it, almost like a dog. But when it landed again on the other side, it took off on two legs and then both its arms and legs, and then it was just the legs again. We waited there for an hour in pitch blackness under that picnic table until an ambassador found us. We were all shaking and crying and trying to explain. Even though Jessie was 13 years old, she was terrified. That just scared us more. We rushed back through the lodge and didn't do the fire pit that night. I didn't see Jessie again after that. But I heard some other seniors talk about a bear attack or something and that her back was all messed up. Me and Emily curled up on the bottom bunk under the sheets. We went home the next day and apparently everything had already been explained to the worried parents. I remember that before I got on the bus, a real park ranger looking guy pulled both me and Emily aside to ask about the bear. We tried to tell him it was not a bear. It was definitely not a bear, but he didn't seem to believe us. He asked about the Gimp man, too, holding up a picture and asking if we had seen him or anything to do with him. We told him we'd seen him last night and that the bear had been holding his bag. We told him about where Jesse's camp was, and we both got stickers and were ushered onto the bus. To this day, I'm thankful to Jessie. If it weren't for her quick thinking, we could have died in those woods that night. I haven't heard about the Gimp man since either. I don't know if he's alive or not, and I haven't been back to that camp since. I now live in Canada, far away. Feels better to get it out in words and give me some peace of mind. Pretty freaky story. I don't know what you all make of that. I don't know what they saw, but anyway, pretty terrifying. Now, this next account, and I think I've got one after this, but I'm not sure. I think I do. Anyway, this witness states, I was referred to this interesting, excuse me, I was referred to this interesting, this is the preamble. I was referred to this interesting account after a previous Wendigo related post. The person who forwarded it to me insisted that the woman in the story is very credible and is a friend, but I'll leave that to your discretion. She states, I love to go hiking. I go with my 3-year-old German Shepherd, Carrie, and I let her go unleashed since we like to go to secluded places. Now, I had been hiking over the Utah mountains and wanted a new hike that wasn't too far from me. I have an app that tells me about hikes near me, if it is a hard hike, reviews, and if it's dog friendly. Now, I was scrolling through All Trail looking for possibly something new, but I wasn't too hopeful. But to my delight, there was something new. I don't know why I don't remember the name of it, but I do remember it was the bottom of the list and it had one review saying good. I thought that was kind of strange, mostly because people love to review hikes and try to tell the city what they can do to improve the hike and make it more safe. But I figured it wasn't a popular hike. So the next day, Carrie and I packed up all our stuff and went up towards the hike. I always carry a first aid kit, extra food, a knife, and just emergency stuff in case I get lost. Now, it's important to mention now that Carrie eats a raw diet, meaning she eats raw meat, not cooked. And since we were going so early in the morning, I thought I'd bring some with us, for her. I put it in her blue backpack I make her wear and decided that it was getting warmer, we would stop eating. Where I live, there's a long drive through the canyon and many roads going toward the hike we'd like to go on. This one was a little further than I was used to, but I didn't care. It was new and I was excited, as was Carrie. She cries in the car until we get there. Now, I was following the directions on my phone and I saw that it had led me towards a thin road that was hidden. No wonder I had never heard of this place. It was hidden and far up the mountain. The road only fit one car, so the whole time I was so anxious that the other car would come down and how I would handle that, but there never was, so I never saw another car. When I got to the parking lot, if you can call it that, I noticed there was only space for like 3 cars, all in a tight space. It was small, so I decided to park my car with the front facing towards the road. I thought maybe it was private property, checking the app, but it didn't say anything about private property. I shrugged it off, got Carrie out, and prepared us and saw the trail. Now, even though I knew there wasn't anyone parked there, I kept Carrie on a leash. I didn't know if there were bikers along the trail, but after 30 minutes or so, I didn't see anyone. I decided to let her off the leash. It was a steep hike for the first half, but it was beautiful. We were deeply in the woods and I felt at peace. I used to wear headphones when I hiked, but didn't anymore, so I was enjoying the natural sounds of the forest. It was still early morning, so I wore a light jacket and decided when it got warmer, I did carry her breakfast. Now, before you start to hate, I know bringing Carrie's raw meat was stupid and ignorant of me. I had never seen a bear or wolf or anything, so I got cocky and just thought it was okay. I learned my lesson that day, and so it's needed to tell me I was dumb. No need to tell me I was dumb. Now here's where we begin the bad part of this story. The trail finally stopped being steep and sort of an easy hike from here. When you get to the top, you can see through the trees a beautiful open meadow. On the other side of it, you can hear a river and a waterfall. The trail went around the meadow. The meadow was beautiful with mountains in the background and the sound of water. This hike was almost the most beautiful one I've ever been on. And when Carrie and I were sort of in the center of the meadow, she stopped right in front of me and looked towards the meadow. Carrie always walked ahead of me, and when she stopped, I stopped since I trusted her judgment. Before I could look, the smell hit me first. You know, the typical rotting smell, but oh my God, words can't explain how bad this was. It burnt my nose and started to make me tear up. I put my shirt over my nose, feeling nauseous, and looked over to where Carrie was looking. In the middle of the meadow was a deer. Now, I've seen does, but never seen a male deer in person, but his antlers were huge. The beauty of the deer was amazing, but not enough to take away the disgusting smell that was making me sick. The deer was looking towards the mountains and away from me. I thought maybe Carrie's food was going bad, and I checked that, and it seemed fine. And when I looked up again, the deer was looking towards our direction. I noticed that Carrie's hackles went up at that, and she started to cry nervously. Now, I've heard of Wendigos and skinwalkers. I am Native American. It isn't common for these creatures to be in our childhood stories. That and listening to scary stories on YouTube. Now, when Carrie did that, I got a bad feeling in my stomach despite the sickness. It was a Wendigo. And I know that. Now, I didn't know what to do. And these creatures were the only part of my stories to make me go to bed, not instructions on what to do. Plus, my grandmother was the one with the stories and passed away. She was the one with the experience, not my mom or anyone else. I glanced at Carrie again when she cried and looked back towards the creature. It started to stand on its hind legs. Holy hell, it was tall, and it faced my direction. It started to walk towards me. I was going to run until I heard it in my head. I heard, I am the one of this land. Suddenly it started to run towards me full speed. I screamed, called Carrie, and started to run. Carrie was following right behind me. I started to cry as I was running since I could hear it catch up to me. It was loud. It was destroying everything it met to get to me. The adrenaline running through me was making me just focus on running. I didn't know where to go. I just ran. The trail suddenly got smaller and the bushes with thorns started to appear, but I didn't feel them as they cut my arms. As I heard it got closer, it suddenly went to the left, and as I ran straight, I had the nerve to look back to see what was gone, see it was gone, but also Carrie. Carrie, I said, but right as I called out for her, the trail ended with a foot drop into the patch of rocks. I hit my head, bleeding a bit. But again, I could feel it that much that I got up. I looked towards the forest when I suddenly heard a loud cry from my right. It was Carrie. Carrie, I shouted out. I stood up crying and lost that what to do. I looked back to see the river leading to the waterfall I heard. Suddenly, a heavy weight ran into me, and we both fell back. I hit my head again on the back and looked up to see Carrie. Carrie had blood all over her. It was pouring from her neck. Carrie, I cried out. She was whimpering and breathing heavily. She still had her backpack on with some cuts in it. Before I had a chance to help her, a scream came from the forest. I looked back at the waterfall, and something had the strength to pick up my 85-pound dog and carry her. I didn't know where I was planning to go. I was just running to the waterfall as if it was a safe place. I was almost there when I heard the creature land on the rocks I made early. I tripped at that and looked back to see it looking at me. Its eyes were black, or I think so. And it could also have been that it wasn't anything there. I don't know. I took off Carrie's backpack and threw it towards the monster, hoping it would take the meat and just leave us alone. I was scooting back towards the waterfall, crying as I did, holding and dragging Carrie with my left arm. I found that being so close to the creature made me literally weak in the knees. It walked over to me, taking huge steps. It looked so different to before. Before it looked like a deer, and now as it crawled over to me, it looked like a monster. I don't know how else to describe this awful demon. I don't. I'm sorry. But I felt water hit my head hard as I reached the waterfall. I kept going until I was up against the wall. There was barely enough space where water wasn't hitting Carrie in its faces. Carrie felt limp at that point. I could somewhat see the creature through the water, but I still saw it coming towards me. It stood on its hind legs when it was close enough to me watching me. The smell was so disgusting. I could hardly help but throw up in my mouth. It reached its arms out to grab me. I screamed so loud, I lost my voice. After I let out that scream, another scream came from the deep forest. The creature snapped its head almost completely backward, like looking towards the scream. The scream sounded like the one this one had left out earlier. It was still holding on to Carrie, crying and screaming since its arms were close. It looked back at me, pulling its arm away, and again said in my mind, I am the one of this land. With that, it took steps back watching me and went back to the riverbank. It crawled on all fours, stopping next to Carrie's backpack. It ripped it apart and pulled out the meat, eating it with the plastic bag was all still on it. It suddenly screamed and ran towards the direction of the other scream from earlier. When I thought it was gone, I stood up shakily and carried towards the trail again. When I was running, I came across my backpack that I had left earlier and stopped. It was ripped apart. So I took off my jacket and wrapped it around Carrie's neck where she was bleeding a lot. After that, I barely remember. All I remember is carrying Carrie and driving down, screaming the whole way towards the emergency vet. They asked us what happened, and I told them it was a bear. They called the ambulance since I had blood all over me, and they couldn't tell if it was mine or Carrie's. Carrie made it through surgery and had to have some stitches on her along with a pad. It didn't really heal, and a huge bump grew in there. It had been affected, but eventually got better. She also had a bite mark on the top of her left eye that has healed much better. They pulled out a 4-inch tooth. I don't have it because I couldn't even look at it, but they declared it from a bear, even though they said it looked weird. Now, I was waiting for Carrie. I went to look up the trail on the app, and it was gone. I don't know why or how, but it is. I don't remember where it is either. That's all a blur. I haven't been hiking since, and I refused to take Carrie. That time my mom took her. She did it while I was at work, but regretted it because she said Carrie was crying and was so scared they had to just go home. My mom knows I scream at nights from nightmares from a week or two. Mom put white candles in my room to get rid of the bad spirits attracted by the negativity. So yeah, that's my story. I've heard stories where people saw a Wendigo and they didn't get harmed, and God, I wish I went through that. I hate hiking. My therapist thinks I may have PTSD, only knows of it as a bear. I'm getting through it. Carrie too. Hopefully one day I can go back, but I don't see that being for a while. Please, if you're going to go up the mountains, please prepare. Mother Nature is not only unpredictable, but has things there that just don't make sense in our heads. So please be safe. I say that seriously sincere. I don't know what to think about that one. Pretty dramatic. And most of these stories have been pretty dramatic. I do have one more. It's getting late, but I guess I'll go ahead and talk about it. The witness states, I've lived in Idaho all my life. I spent a lot of time outside or in the wilderness as a kid. My grandparents would take me camping, and my older brother and I would always hike up whatever trail we could find to get a view of the sunset. On one of these occasions, something terrifying happened. We were up at a campsite I know as Warm River. The river never freezes over. And my brother and I were on the regular evening hike. There was an old tunnel bored through the mountain at one part of the trail, probably an old train tunnel, and we were walking through it when I heard something I'll never forget. After walking probably 2/3 of the way through the tunnel, I heard a terrible screech at the end we entered through. The screech was wasn't like anything I've ever heard before. I've heard the screams of animal on dark and windy nights. I even think I heard a Bigfoot call a few times, but never the metallic grinding screech I heard that day. The point is, whatever the sound was, it did not sound natural in any capacity. I probably jumped 5 foot in the air when I heard it, and my brother shouted a few choice curses before shooing me quickly to the exit of the tunnel. At this point, my brother decided we should just continue walking and head back after whatever made the noise hopefully cleared out. We didn't have any firearms with us, so I was upset. My brother assured me we'd be fine and we'd make the walk back without incident. However, I didn't get any sleep that night. Whether it was the thing that screeched at us or just my imagination, I heard things moving around the campsite the whole night, as well as whispers echoing through the darkness outside the trailer. I woke my brother up a few times to check out what it was, but he refused each time, telling me that was probably just another camper staying up late and enjoying themselves. The rest of the trip was normal. We packed up the following day, and my life continued as normal. I was disconcerted, but chalked what happened as a harmless event that must have been exaggerating in retrospect. So a few weeks later, we went up to Pine Basin, an old ski lodge my family rented each year for family reunions. Here I'd mess around with my cousins, our favorite activities being night games. We would play hide and seek, a game called Ghost in the Graveyard, and other games like that. In one instance, I was chosen to be the seeker for the hide and seek game. Because I was one of the younger cousins, I got a flashlight as an advantage. Normally, all the younger cousins hid close to the lodge, and the older cousins hid in the trees or at the base of the nearby mountain. As I was searching near the bottom of the mountain, I heard a familiar whistle up the mountain a bit. We would always whistle as a hint to our location. It sounded like someone was hiding way up near the tree known as the underwear tree. So you guess why I began trekking up and towards the whistle. As I climbed closer, I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I continued warily and convinced myself that it would be fine. I hated walking in the night alone, but figured whoever I found would walk me back to the lodge. As I neared the tree, I noticed that it was deathly silent. This alerted me that something was very wrong because we could always hear the adults having fun back at the lodge. I was anxious to hurry back, so I called out, "I found you, Scott." I thought the whistle was my older cousin's. "Come back down with me." I got no reply, but I wasn't planning on waiting. As I began walking back down the path, I heard a voice call, "You almost had me." So I ran back to investigate. I flashed my light in the branches of the tree and saw a monstrosity that was not my cousin. It looked like a poorly drawn stick person or stick figure made into a human with emaciated figure and lifeless eyes. I remember its face looked like the skin on its head, but being pulled from behind. It had torn and stretched features. As soon as I saw this creature, I screamed, dropped the flashlight, and ran back to the lodge. The entire time I ran was overcome by an overpowering smell, and I could hear the thing running after me. As I approached the camp, I saw a few people, my cousins, at the bottom of the mountain waiting for me. I was crying and shaking, and they took me inside. I told my dad what happened, but my cousins all said they didn't see anything following me. The adults kept us inside for the night, and I kept hearing sounds drifting in from the mountains. I never played night games after that happened, and I was always terrified that my cousins wouldn't listen to my warnings. Now, ever since that night, I've always felt uneasy up in those mountains. I used to be religious and figured it was a demon of some type trying to kill me or something like that, but those mountains have never felt the same after that incident. A few years ago, the game Until Dawn became popular, and I watched a walkthrough of it on YouTube. When the Wendigo first appeared in the game, I got chills down my spine. was exactly what I saw. And I did a ton of research on them. I figure someone must have gotten snowed in at that old lodge and resorted to cannibalism, but that doesn't explain what happened at Warm River. I still hear that screech from time to time. It never occurred to me until watching Until Dawn that they might be from the same thing. And it scares the hell out of me every time. I heard it earlier tonight, and that's why I decided to finally write my story down. So, folks, there you go. Got any questions? Please put them up there. I'll see what I can answer. I want to thank Mortal Clown for her donation, Old Rubberless for his super sticker. Very much appreciated. I do want to say I did set up a Discord account. Apparently, y'all wanted to be able to chat after the show, so I set it up. Marla or Mike or Bernadette can give you the direct link to it if you're interested in participating. No questions, huh? 13 lilies. Lon, what do you think of demon face syndrome? Have you heard of this? I have never heard of that. I have no idea what that is. Maybe you can write it up and send it to me because I've never heard of that before. Sorry. Jose Sanchez, hi Lon. Have you seen the new book on rakes by Missy Sterling yet? I'm not sure if it was ever published. It's called Rakes, Fakes, and Double Takes. No, I haven't. You know, I wrote my book about these crawlers, these humanoids, what I call meme humanoids. You know, I'll be honest with you, that rake designation, fleshgate, or whatever you want to call it, kind of seems creepy pasta to me. I believe these creatures do exist, but I don't know exactly what they are. And, you know, that whole rake thing kind of sounds like Slender Man to me, or something to that effect. I don't know. I don't know what to think about. No, I didn't read the book, but I appreciate you mentioning it to me. I might look for it. B3 Airspace. Do you think Wendigos are interdimensional? I think most cryptids are interdimensional, to be honest with you. I think for the most part, none of these creatures live on our Earth plane and kind of move in and out. The Wendigos aren't a species. Basically, it's a human being who contracts some type of disease, some mental disease, where they actually revert to cannibalism. It's been documented. I've always said that Chad Lewis's book Wendigo is probably the best resource that you can find. I would definitely read that book, and that's why I made this this video tonight, because I wanted to kind of clear the air about what not these things are, because there's a legend and there's a lot of distortion in it as well. Are there a species of these things? I really don't know. Nancy Malcolm asked, are the reports increasing? Quite frankly, they're getting harder to find. I think what most people are seeing and are these crawler humanoids. Most people don't know about them, and if something shows up with antlers, they automatically say it's a Wendigo. What I said before, the zombie were-deer, that seems to be the standard fare as far as what sightings are. So, Michael Angel Escalante, who wins in a debate between Bigfoot or Wendigo? I have no idea. I'd still put my money on the Bigfoot. Dagnammit. Have Wendigos been seen in cities or just in the wilderness? Missing 411. I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen one being in an urban area, quite frankly. Again, you know, you got to go with the actual Algonquin legend and folklore as compared to the the European American version of these things. What most people say are Wendigos are something entirely different, even though we really don't know what they are. So, I kind of leave it. That's why I made it the way I did tonight, because I kind of want to leave it up to you all to figure out or to decide what you think it really is. So, so anyway, I want to thank each and all of you for watching and chatting. If you donated, it's truly appreciated. Your support's what makes all this possible. So please like, subscribe, and share. And if you have a sighting or encounter report that you'd like to be considered for the show or for Phantoms of Monsters blog, feel free to forward to me at my email, Lon Strickler at phantomsofmonsters.com. Now, Marla just put up the Discord link for after the show. If you want to do some chatting among yourselves, just go there and enjoy yourself. So until we meet again, have a safe weekend, and I will see you next week. Not knowing what I'm going to talk about, I'm actually leaning towards doppelgangers and some other strange things that have come to me lately. There have been some actual possibility that doppelgangers and bilocation and some other type of beings have somehow gotten involved in some of these cases I've been looking at. So we'll see. But anyway, again, have a safe weekend, and I will see you next week. Take care.